In early 2012, I was meeting with Eric Asmoff, a wine writer for the New York Times. And we were talking about viticulture. We were going to have lunch. And when we started talking about tasting the wines and talking about the wines, he said, based on what you've said about the way you work in the vineyards, you must be using native yeast to ferment your juice. And I said, absolutely not. The reason is that there's a succession of different yeasts during a fermentation when they're coming in on the skins of the berries. There's yeast that are tolerant of high sugar and low alcohol. Then there's the yeast that take over from them, tolerant of moderate sugar and moderate alcohol. And then finally, they hand the baton off to the finishing yeast, which are tolerant of high alcohol and low sugar. The problem is that the first yeast are depleting most of the nutrients. So by the time you get to the finishing yeast, they may not have enough nutrients to finish the job, and the fermentation stops. That leaves some residual sugar, which is an opportunity for a spoilage yeast called Brettanomyces. I explained that's why we don't do it. I don't want to risk having an outbreak of Brettanomyces in our wine. But that stuck with me, that conversation. And I thought, maybe we should try it again. I've tried it at another winery. Not long after that, I got a knock on my door, and it's a young woman named Anaïs Huet-Cassou. She's a microbiologist from France, and she asked me if I was interested in her isolating wild yeast from our vineyards to use to ferment our juice. And I said, sure, I'd love to do this. I chose 50 different areas in the vineyard, and she'd go to the vines that we had marked, and when the results came back, we found that we had 2 wolves, 3 coyotes, and a dog. The second wolf we called Funky because it had kind of a swampy, muddy, almost barnyard character in the aroma. I had always wanted to name something with this project after Anaïs because she did so much work. And so I wrote her name down on a piece of paper, and I would look at it every now and again. Anaïs Huet-Cassou. One day, in a Zen-like moment, the answer floated off the page, and we had the word chouette. Chouette is an owl in French, so we had yet another animal. And chouette also is slang for great. They found the sappy part of an oak tree, which has sugars, put a piece of Scotch tape against it, and since it came from an oak tree, we call that one the squirrel. We had a succession of interns, and a couple of them asked if they could take over the project. And I said, under one condition, you have to find a monkey. So we now have a monkey. And the monkey spelled Monkee as a tribute to the group when I was a kid, the Monkees. Alaina's going to be telling you about the technique, how we isolate the wild yeast, and the purpose, which is we wanted a wild yeast from each of our 4 estate vineyards to ferment the juice coming from those vineyards and give a deeper sense and expression of place from those vineyards.
So a bit about the process of how we grow up our native strains is we start from a very small amount of cells that we save from year to year frozen. We put them in a glycerol solution so that nothing happens to them and they're just kind of in stasis. So we start from a small frozen tube like that will then streak out to a petri dish, looking for some nice uniformity with our colonies and how they look. From there, we will then go to a falcon tube. So about 50 mils of sterile grape juice goes into this tube, and we put in 1 little colony of the cells from the petri dish and put it into our incubator. From there, it stays about a day, being nice and warm and getting some oxygen to help the cells grow nice and healthy. After a day in there, we move to 1 liter of, again, sterile grape juice so that they have all the food and sugar and warmth that they need in order to grow nice, healthy cell populations. From here, we take our cell media and we put it out on the mezzanine in what we call our yeast tanks. And it's at that point that they start growing up in the juice that they're going to ferment. The whole process takes about 4 days to complete. So throughout fermentation, throughout harvest, we have all of our strains in each one of these different sizes of growth media so that we're ready to pitch it into a tank when we need to. To help us learn about our strains, we keep them frozen from year to year, and every year we try and do some kind of experiment to understand more about them. So our native yeasts are really important to the whole process of making Opus One. It's a lot about nuances and character, and each one of these different strains can provide a lot of very subtle flavor and sensory differences compared to one another. It originally wasn't our goal to do all of the fermentations with 100% native yeast, but as we began to learn more about them and understand their contributions to the wine, it became clear that it was a really wonderful investment and the way that we wanted to go in terms of really incorporating a sense of terroir and highlighting the sense of place that Opus One is.